One of the basic tenets of Scripture is that God has revealed himself, that God has made himself known to us, that God speaks. All through the Bible, we see this phrase, and God said. And God said this, and God said that, and God said this, and God said that. God speaks. And you were created to have a relationship with God. God made you to love you, and he wants you to know him as well as he knows you. Now, in order to know God, in order to have a relationship, you got to talk to him. And he's got to talk to you. You've got to have a communication. Without communication, there is no relationship. Now, the problem is, communication can be easily misunderstood. Would you agree with that? I mean, with people, much less God. You know, when Kay speaks to me, A, I don't always hear, and B, even when I do hear, I don't always understand. Now, we've been married 35 years. It gets better, but I still don't always hear, and I still don't always understand. Those of you guys who are newlyweds, let me give advice to some of you men. Guys, you need to understand that there are two things you must understand about women, but nobody knows what they are. So you're going to be in the dark the rest of your life. Now, I deeply love my wife, deeply, but I don't always hear her, and I don't always understand her, even when I do hear her. And so certainly, I should expect that in my relationship to God. However, I will tell you this, it gets easier. It really does. It gets easier over time. You know, after 35 years of marriage, when my wife calls, she doesn't have to say, "This is Kay." I know her voice. She knows my voice. And now after walking with God for a long, long time, for over 40 years, I want you to know, I know his voice. And it's easier to figure out now when it's just me talking to myself, or I've got an idea off of a radio, or when it's really God. It does get easier, just like in a marriage. I know my wife's voice, and she knows my voice. And, you know, when the devil gives you an idea, we call that temptation. When God gives you an idea, we call that inspiration. When you get an idea, we call that stupidity. No, I'm just kidding. But people say, has God ever talked to you audibly? No. Why would he need to? He doesn't need to go through my ear. He can go directly to my mind. It's just like right now there are radio waves and there are TV waves going through this air that are there. They are real. You can't see them. There are actually pictures going through the air right now. You can't see it. That doesn't mean it's not real. It's real. But if you have a tuner, a radio, or a TV, and you tune in, you can get the message and you can see the picture. And the key is tuning in. You got to know how to tune in. And this weekend, we're going to look at how do you tune in to hear God speak to you. I can have the finest Bose radio, but if it's not tuned into the channel, I'm still not going to hear the radio program, no matter how good the equipment is. Most of you don't remember this because you're not that old, but back in the 70s, there was a thing called the CB radio craze. And first truckers had these CB radios, citizen band radios, in their car, and then people started putting them in their car, and there was a whole lingo about it, and they made a bunch of movies about it, and there were phrases like put your pedal to the metal and 10-4 good buddy, and one of the phrases of the CB craze was, have you got your ears on? And that meant is, are you tuned in? Are you listening? Well, that's not actually a new concept. 2,000 years before the CB radio craze, Jesus said something like that. Notice there on your outline, if you take out your message notes, in Luke chapter 8, it says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. And what's he saying? He's saying you gotta be tuned in. And today we're gonna look at a famous story that Jesus told that mentions how to tune into God, teaches us how to tune into God and hear God speak to us. But before we do that, I wanna just quickly give you 3 reasons why this is important. Would you write these down? You may think, well, it's not important for me to hear from God. Oh, yes, it is, because number 1, it proves I'm in God's family. It proves I'm in God's family. It verifies that you're a believer. It confirms your relationship to God. If you don't have any communication with God, you don't have a relationship with God. You got to have communication in order to have a relationship. You talk to him and he talks to you. I mean, this is the difference between having a relationship and knowing about somebody. I could say, I know Tom Cruise. Now, I don't really know him, but I could say, I know Tom Cruise. You say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, I write him all the time. Does he write you back? No. I call him all the time. Does he call you back? No. Have you ever talked to him? No. Then you don't really have a relationship. You're just a fan. Okay, you're just a fan. And a lot of people are fans of God, but they don't have a relationship with God. God wants you to be able to communicate. So if you never hear from God in your life, you have every reason to doubt that you have a relationship with him. Because if you got a relationship, you communicate with each other on a daily basis. It proves I'm in God's family. Second thing, it protects me from mistakes. It protects me from mistakes. Now here's a cool thing. If you actually do listen to God on a daily basis, you'll find that he's going to warn you some potholes, some traps, some bends in the road, and you'll save yourself a lot of time and energy and frustration and failure if you do it God's way. He will warn you in advance of traps. Look what the Bible says. Proverbs 3 verse 6. Listen for God's voice in everything you do and everywhere you go. He's the one who will keep you on track. I couldn't count the number of times that God has spared me from a failure, a mistake, or a major embarrassment when I just got that little word. And sometimes God only says one word to me, don't. And that's all he needs to say, don't, or no. Sometimes it's two, watch out. Sometimes God will save you the time and the money and the energy of going down the wrong path if you will listen to him. That's the third thing. Not only protects me from mistakes, it produces success in life. Now, I'm not talking about the way the world defines success, if everybody's supposed to be a millionaire and you know, nothing goes wrong in your life. That's not success. Success is being exactly what God made you to be. It's the fulfillment, it's the meaning and purpose of living in the center of God's will. And in Psalm 32, the Bible says this, I will guide you along the best pathway for your life. I will advise you and watch over you. I want you to circle the phrase, your life. I will guide you, God says, he promises. I will guide you along the best pathway for your life. Notice it's for your life. Did you know that there's a best pathway for your life, but there's a different pathway for everybody else's life? And the reason why we often get in trouble is we're trying to follow other people's pathways. Most people start off as originals, and everybody starts off as original, but most of them end up as carbon copies of somebody else. Because we start trying to go down somebody else's path. If you listen to God, you know you have a relationship with him. My sheep hear my voice, Jesus said. You know that he's going to protect you from mistakes, and you know you're going to be on the right path. You're going to make fewer errors, and you're going to have more success in life because you're being on the path that was meant for you to be on. Now, how do I hear God speak? Well, in Luke chapter 8, Jesus tells a very famous story. It's called the story of the four soils, or the parable of the seed and the soils. And he gives an illustration that everybody would understand in those days, the illustration of a farmer. He says a farmer goes out to sow seed. Now, when a farmer goes out to plant seed, they didn't have planting machines in those days, and he certainly didn't plant it one seed at a time and cover it up like that. That would take too long to plant one seed at a time in a field would take way too long. So farmers in the ancient world, and still today, they do it in rural areas without machines. They broadcast seed. And they've got a bag of seed, and as they walk down the pathway through the field, they throw the seed out. This is called broadcasting. It's where we get the word TV broadcasting. It's because it's broadly casting the seed. It's not narrow casting one seed at a time. You're broadcasting the seed on the whole field. Now, some of that seed falls on rocky soil, some of it falls on the footpath, some of it falls where there's weeds, some of it actually falls on the soil that's been cultivated and ready for growth. And Jesus says these 4 kinds of soil represent 4 kinds of attitudes that I can have, and these attitudes are going to determine whether I actually hear God in my life or don't. So this is a very important story. And he says, depending on the type of soil, you get 4 types of response when God speaks. God is talking to you all the time. All the time. You're just not tuned into it. And you're not on the same channel. Now, the Bible says in this story that the farmer represents God, and the seed represents what God wants to say to you. It's his word. And the soil represents my heart or my mind. It's my attitude and how receptive I am to hearing God. Now, he says in this story, there are 4 things that if I want to hear God speak, I have to do. You might write these down. Number 1, if I want to hear God speak to me, first, I must cultivate an open mind. I must cultivate an open mind. I've got to be receptive. I've got to be willing to hear from God. I've got to be ready and eager and willing to listen. Because the first barrier to hearing God is actually resistance. I'm just resistant to it. Now, Jesus talks about this in verse 5. A farmer went out to sow his seed, and as he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path. And as it was trampled on, and the birds of the air ate it up. Now, what's he talking about here? Well, on a farm and in a field, there are footpaths between the rows where the vegetables are going to grow. And there's a footpath that the farmer can walk down. As the farmer walks on this footpath, time after time after time, that soil gets pushed down. It gets compacted. And it gets hardened by a lot of traffic going through. And like a lot of minds, you got a lot of traffic going through your mind's going to get hardened. It gets pushed down. And he says when he broadcasts the seed, some of the seed falls on the hardened path, And he says any seed scattered there has no chance of taking root because the ground is hard. The seed can't penetrate. It lies on the surface. In fact, he says the birds come along and they see the seed and they just eat it up before it even has a chance to sprout. And he says, this life is for the birds. You know, when you can't hear God, this life is for the birds. He said, it's never going to take root in your life. And he's saying, the first thing you do is you have to be receptive. You have to cultivate an open mind. Now, Jesus gives us the meaning in verse 12 of what he's saying. Those along the footpath, he said, they represent the ones who hear God speak. But then the devil comes along and takes the word from their heart so they cannot believe and be saved. Now, what's he saying here? What does the footpath represent? Well, it represents the first kind of mind I can have. And a footpath has 2 characteristics. It's hardened and it's narrow. Do you know any minds like that? They're hardened and they're narrow. They're narrow-minded and they're hard-headed, and they won't even be open to the possibility. They don't even believe it's possible that God could talk to them. Well, no wonder he never does, because they're hard-headed and narrow-minded like the footpath. You've noticed that the quality of reception on a cell phone varies widely. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? And the same is true with you. There's a spiritual principle there. You must be positioned correctly in order to hear the message. There's some places you can be, you're not going to hear God speak. But you've got to be positioned correctly so that you can say, can you hear me now? And you have to be in the right receptive area, in the right receptive mood. The point is, sometimes we never even give God a chance to talk to us. Our minds are made up. We don't want God to talk to us because we, frankly, don't want his input. We've made up our minds. We want to do what we want to do, not what God wants us to do. And so our hearts are hardened, we're unwilling to listen. Now write this down. The hardened soil represents a closed mind. The hardened soil represents a closed mind. In other words, I don't even believe that God does talk to people. And I don't believe God would ever talk to me. Well, of course he's not going to talk to you if that's what you believe. Now, what causes a closed mind? I mean, really, what causes people to not hear God? there are 3 mental barriers. You might write these down. Number 1 is pride. If I'm prideful and I don't think I need God in my life, he's not going to talk to me. He said, I can handle this myself. I can figure it out myself. So I'm not even listening. I'm not even open to the possibility that God might want to say something to me. I don't need his help, so I don't pray and I don't listen. Pride. Number 2 is fear. Fear is a mental block. A lot of people can't hear God speak because they're afraid to hear God speak. They think, you know, if God spoke to me, put a thought in my mind, and I actually listened to it, maybe he'd turn me into some kind of religious nut, some kind of, you know, fanatic, and I'd be walking around saying, praise the Lord all the time, you know, and, you know, all of a sudden I wear a big hairdo or something, you know, and polyester, you know. What if he turns me into some religious fanatic? No, he wants to set you free. The more you know God, the more natural you become, not the more silly, quirky, weird you become. The more you know God, the more natural you become. You become what God made you to be. Pride will close my mind. Fear will close my mind. And here's the third one, bitterness. When I am holding on to a hurt, when I'm holding on to resentment, when I'm holding on to a grudge, then I'm not going to be listening to God because my heart is hardened. Things have happened in your life that have hurt you. I'm sorry. But if you're holding on to hurt, whenever you hold on to a hurt, here's what happens. Your heart grows hard and it grows cold. And you become defensive, even defensive to God's love. Why did God allow this to happen? And you get very defensive and you close your mind and you close your heart. Some of you have been hurt very badly this week. Some of you were hurt badly years and years ago, but you're still holding on to it. And I want to tell you, as your pastor who loves you and who cares for you and wants what's best for you, you got to let it go. Not for their sake, but for your sake. The resentment is killing you. You're not hurting the person who you're resentful against, who you're holding a grudge against. You're not hurting them at all. You are hurting yourself. It is a self-inflicted wound. And you're allowing people from your past to continue to hurt you today. That's dumb. You need to let it go. Not because they deserve it. You don't deserve to be forgiven for all the stuff you've done. You need to let it go because you can't get on with your life. When you forgive somebody, you're the one who's liberated, not them. You're the one who's liberated. And if you hold on to it, your heart gets harder and harder and harder, and you got the hard, closed mind and the hard heart. Bitter life is a wasted life. As Jesus said, the birds come along and eat the seed. It's for the birds. Here's the smart response. James chapter 1 says this. Get rid of all the filth and evil in your lives. That means maybe you ought to turn off the TV. Maybe there's some stuff you shouldn't be watching or reading. Get rid of the filth and evil in your lives, because that's going to trample it down, make your hard heart. And humbly accept the message God has planted. There's that word, planted, in your hearts. For it is strong enough to save your soul. Circle the phrase, humbly accept. This is the key. I say, Lord, I tried to figure it out on my own, but I kept hitting the wall. I don't like the way I'm going in life. I'm going with your plan, not my plan. I'm going to listen to you. I must cultivate an open mind. Number 2, the second way to hear God is I must take time to listen. I cultivate an open mind. I allocate time to listen. I take time, make time to listen. I have to slow down and make time to be quiet so I can hear him. Why? Because the second barrier to you hearing from God is hurry. When you're in a hurry, you cannot hear God. You know, if I fly over the country of France, I miss all the details. If I take a train through France, I'll see a little bit more of the details. If I go even slower and drive through France in a car, I'll see a lot more details. If I actually walked France from end to end, I would see a lot more details. You miss the details of life when you're in a hurry. You are missing so much by being in a hurry. And what you need to do is you need to pull back on the RPMs. You need to slow down. And when you slow down, you're going to hear God. I've got to make time to hear him. I can't always be in a hurry. You see, when we're in a hurry, God gets shuffled, God gets shortchanged. We skim in all our relationships. We skim. I don't have time to be alone with God today. I don't have time to sit down and be quiet, read the Bible, talk to him for a minute, listen. You know, so much of the time it's like, Lord, I need you to talk, tell me what to do, but do it in a hurry. Speak, but speak quickly. And God says, no, you got to just slow down. You got to turn down the RPMs. Luke 8, verse 6 is the second kind of soil. He says, this farmer, he's sowing seed, and he says, other seed fell on shallow soil with underlying rock. And this seed began to grow, but it soon withered and died for lack of moisture. Now, this is the shallow soil or the rocky soil. Now, let me explain to you. In the nation of Israel, in the land of Israel, much of Israel is a very thin layer of topsoil on top of a bedrock of limestone. So unless they break up that limestone or put on more topsoil, the roots aren't going to go down deep. And without roots, when the heat's on, the plants die. I mean, we understand this in Southern California because during the springtime, we get all our hills turn green. Once there's water, all the hills turn green and all of the California grasses bloom and it's real pretty. You get the wildflowers and the poppies and all that kind of stuff. But the moment the rain stops, the hills turn brown in Southern California. Why? Because the grass has no roots. It can't go down deep enough to get water from the well springs that are down deeper. And so it just, when you don't have roots, when you're shallow soil, when you have shallow soil on hard rock, it initially sprouts up great and it looks good, but it doesn't last and it withers quickly. Most plants wither when the heat's on because they don't have roots. Now, this is what Jesus says about this in verse 13. The rocky soil, or the soil with rock underneath it, it's not talking about soil with a bunch of little rocks, but soil with a bedrock. The rocky soil represents those who hear the message with joy. But like young plants in such soil, their roots don't go very deep. They believe for a while, but they wilt when the hot winds of testing blow. Now write this down. The shallow soil represents a superficial mind. The hard soil represents a closed mind. I don't even want to hear God. The shallow soil represents a superficial mind. It's not very deep. And a lot of times we hear God's word and we get excited about it, but we don't allow it to change us. We react superficially. We react emotionally. We're moved impulsively, but we don't let the time to let it sink in. I couldn't count the number of times over the last 30 years I've been out on a patio after a service and somebody will come up to me in tears and say, Pastor Rick, that message really touched me. It really, really touched me. But over the next months, you don't see any change in their life. In fact, maybe I never may even see them again. They're touched, but they're not transformed. They're emotionally moved. They get a quiver in their liver. Woo! That was really good. But as soon as the emotion's gone, nothing happens because they don't allow the Word of God to penetrate the bedrock of their personality. They come for the movement. They come for the motion. They come for the joy. Notice it says there, the rocky soil represents those who hear the message with joy. Circle that, with joy. They're thrilled, but they're not transformed. They walk out the door and immediately forget it. Which is, by the way, why we have these things at Saddleback, these handout notes. I've told you many times, the United States Air Force did a study and discovered that we forget 90 to 95% of everything we hear within 72 hours. Now, that means if you've heard every message I've preached at Saddleback over 30 years, you only remember 5%. That makes me want to slit my wrist. Because I think of all the preparation that I've done and all the Bible teaching I've done for 30 years, and you don't remember almost none of it, maybe 5%. Okay, you don't remember anything. That's why we pass out notes, because the shortest pencil is longer than the longest memory. And if you write it down, you can take it home and you can put it up on your refrigerator and look at it during the week, or you can put it on your bathroom mirror and look at it in the week. You can laminate it and put it in the shower and look at it. You know, you can put it in the windshield or the visor in your car and pull it down and look at it during the week when you're at a stoplight. And you'll remember it longer if you actually take notes. Now, you may not be taking notes and you're sitting there and you're looking really spiritual, but I'll tell you this, everything I'm saying is going in one ear and out the other. And before you get in your car, you've already forgotten almost everything I've said. And that's the shallow soil. It's superficial mind. Notice it says shallow roots, and it says they believe for a while. And then when the heat comes on, you blow up and dry away. I don't want you to be that way. You don't want to be that way. You want to be a deep person, not a shallow person. You want to be a person with spiritual roots. You don't want to be some shallow woman or shallow man. You want to have deep roots so that when recession comes and it lasts for several years, you're able to keep bearing fruit and being green. And when the rogue winds comes and somebody in your family gets sick, or somebody dies, it doesn't blow you away because you've got roots and you're able to stay with it. That's why you've got to take time. Now, how do you develop roots? How do you develop roots? How do you develop spiritual roots? Two ways: a daily time with God and a weekly small group with other believers. These two things, you got to spend time alone with God and you got to spend time with other believers. That's why I talk about this over and over and over. It's the two ways you build roots. If you're not spending time with God on a daily basis, you're going to dry up and blow away when the pressure's on, when the heat's on in your life. You won't be able to handle it. And that daily time with God, you sit down and you be quiet and you read a little bit of the Bible and you talk to God. Maybe you read a little Christian book or something. And you listen, maybe play some music. If you like to journal, do that. We have a whole class on this, class 201. Maybe you've forgotten how to do it. You could go back and take class 201 again. But you gotta make time to listen, sink in. And then you've got to have a weekly small group. Because in that small group, you know what? The small group I'm in right now, I think I've been in it 8 or 9 years. God speaks to me through those people. You say he does? Yes, he does all the time. Why? Because nobody has a complete perspective on life. I don't, and you don't. Every one of us have blinders on. I can see things in your life you can't see. You can see things in my life that I can't see. And that's why we need each other. And I learn from the people in my small group. If you're not in a small group, you don't get that encouragement. Now, the Bible says this. It says, don't give up the habit of meeting together. Instead, let us encourage one another. The reason why the Daniel plan is going to work for many of you is because you're in a small group where everybody's encouraging each other. We all need attaboys. We all need encouragement. If you're trying to do the Daniel plan and get healthy on your own, frankly, I don't expect you to last. I don't. I've just seen it too many times in my own life and in millions or thousands of other people's lives that we need the support in a group to make this thing work. All right? Now, the third thing we have to do in order to hear God is, if you want to hear God, if I want to hear God, I must eliminate the distractions. I must eliminate the distractions, the fuzz that's on the line that I can't hear God clearly. You can't hear God if your mind is crowded with other things, with other thoughts, with other concerns, particularly worries, plans, activities. If you're always listening to the radio or always listening to TV, when God calls you, the circuits are busy. And it's kind of like on Mother's Day when you try to call your mom and you can't get through because all the lines are busy. God can't get through to you because your mind is preoccupied all the time. You're worried about something all the time. You're thinking about something all the time. You've got to eliminate the distractions. Now, Jesus says this in verse 7. Other seed fell on the weeds, and the weeds grew with it and strangled it. Now notice, here's the third kind of soil. This is the soil with weeds in it. And the soil, the seed, God speaks, it actually gets planted, and the plant actually begins to grow. But as it begins to grow, other weeds began to grow up around it, and the weeds began to choke out the life of the vegetable or the plant that was planted, so it never bears fruit. Here's what Jesus says is the meaning of this. Verse 14. The seed that fell among weeds stands for those who they hear God talk to them, like in church or in the Bible or somewhere, but as they go on their way, they are choked by life's worries and riches and pleasures, and they don't mature. They never grow up. Now, I want you to circle a couple things. This verse is full of truth. First, circle the phrase, as they go. It says, as they go, they're choked by the weeds. Let me ask you a question. Are you always on the go? Because if you're always on the go, you're not going to hear God. The Bible says, be still and know that I'm God. Sit down, shut up. Just be quiet, it says, and be quiet, be still. If you're always on the go, you're going to be distracted by other things. Busyness is the third barrier to hearing God. The first is resistance. The second is being in a hurry. And the third is busyness. When I'm always on the go, I can't hear God. And I'm going to miss a lot of what he wants to say. I used to have a sign in my office that said, beware of the busyness. No, excuse me, beware of the barrenness of a busy life. You get so distracted you can't hear God. Notice it says they are choked. That word in in Greek, literally means stressed out. And their merimnon means pulled in different directions. Now, you know what that means, because you're pulled in different directions all the time. And it says they're pulled in different directions. They're stressed out. Their life is choked. The life of you is choked out of you. And that's why you're tired all the time, because you're being pulled in different directions. And he says there are three things that choke out hearing God. Look at them. First, he says, worry. Worries choke out. Worries are weeds, okay? And you're so busy with the problems and pressures of daily living, you're not hearing God. And then he says riches. You can be so busy trying to pay your bills, so busy trying to get out of debt, so busy trying to make more, so busy making a living, you don't make a life. It's like the woman who was wealthy, and I read about her, and she was a multimillionaire, and she killed herself. And at the funeral, somebody said, I don't understand it. She had so much to live for. And her son said, no, she had much to live on. She had nothing to live for. A lot of people have a lot to live on, but nothing to live for. They're making a living, they're not making a life. And he says worries and riches can choke God out of your life. You're so busy going after the buck, you don't have time to hear God. And then he says even pleasure. Now, there's nothing wrong with pleasure. God gives us the ability to have pleasure. Pleasure was God's idea. He thought up all the pleasures, and he gave you the ability to experience pleasure. But he said you can be so busy pursuing fun, you miss God. Now, there are a lot more weeds than just worries and riches and pleasure, but he just mentions these three. By the way, what do you have to do to get weeds in your garden? Nothing. Nothing. You don't have to cultivate weeds. They grow automatically, don't they? In fact, weeds are a sign of neglect. You see weeds in your yard, you will see weeds in your lawn, you see weeds in your garden, it means you're not tending your garden. Weeds are always a sign of neglect. It means you're neglecting time with God and time with your small group. You know what I've discovered is that when I don't want to go to small group, that's when I need it the most. There are a lot of times I don't want to go to small group, I'm tired. But I go and then I get re-energized, because what I need is that fellowship that's going to re-energize me far more than laying on the couch at home and watching a rerun of something. So he says you need to make time. I must eliminate the distractions. Weeds are a sign of neglect, and when I neglect time with God, they start growing in my life. So write this down. The soil with weeds represents a preoccupied mind. Not a closed mind, okay? Not a closed mind, not a resistant mind, not a busy mind, but a preoccupied mind where I'm always thinking about something else and all the circuits are busy. What you need to do is you need to get quiet. You know, there's a story in the Bible about Elijah trying to hear from God, and it says that God spoke to Elijah not in the wind and not in an earthquake and not in fire, but he spoke to God in a whisper. What do you have to do to hear a whisper? Be quiet. I have learned that God rarely yells. In fact, I don't think in my entire life God has ever yelled at me. But God whispers to me all the time. But I can't hear God's whisper unless I'm quiet. Now, the fourth thing, if I want to hear God speak, I must cooperate with what he says. Cooperate, I must just obey him. I must do what he tells me to do. I cultivate an open mind. I allocate time to listen. I eliminate the distractions, and I cooperate with what he says. Whatever he tells me to do, I do it. Now, here's the very important key. God speaks to people who decide in advance they're going to do what he tells them to do, even before he tells them. It's saying yes in advance. So God, I don't know what you want me to do with my life. If you want me to move, I'll move. If you want me to go to school, I'll go to school. If you want me to get married, I'll get married. If you want me to leave this job, I'll leave this job. I'm telling you in advance, my answer to whatever you tell me is yes. Before you even tell me, my answer is whatever you want me to do, I will do it. And that's the person God speaks to. Now, if you say, God, tell me what you want to do, and then I'll decide if I like your plan or mine. God isn't going to waste his breath on you. God doesn't give you his will and his word so you can debate it. And so if you say, now God, you tell me if you want me to get this new job or not take that job, and then I'll decide. And God said, no, you just go ahead and decide on your own. If you're making the decision, you decide on your own. What you must do is in advance say, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. God, I'm saying yes to you. I'm writing my name on a blank check, and I'm handing you the check, and you fill it in. You tell me what you want me to do, and I'm telling you in advance, I'm going to do it. I'm saying yes, Lord. That's the good soil. That's the receptive soil. That's cooperating with what he says. Notice this verse 15. The seed that fell in good soil stands for those who hear the message and retain it in a good and obedient heart. And they persist until they bear fruit. Now this is the fourth kind of soil. I want you to circle four things. Good soil means I hear it, circle here. I retain it, that means I remember what God told me. And that means you're going to need to write it down, because if you don't write it down, you're not going to remember what God told you. I hear it, I retain it, I remember it. I obey it, okay, obedient, and then I persist until I bear fruit. This is the good soil. And the good soil represents, write this down, a willing mind. A willing mind. Now, when I used to study this parable of Jesus, I used to think it was talking about four kinds of people. That there were resistant people, and that there were busy people, and there were preoccupied people, and there were shallow people, and then there were good people. No, I don't believe that anymore. What this represents is four attitudes, and I can have all four attitudes in the same day. You can be in all four of these positions on the same day. And at one moment you're going, God, I don't want to hear you because I know what you're going to say, and I don't want to hear it. And in the next one you're saying, Lord, tell me quick, tell me quick, tell me quick. And you hear it, and yeah, that's good, but then you immediately forget it and don't do anything about it. And then the third one is, yeah, that's really good, and the fruit starts to bear in your life, and then you get busy with your job, or you get busy with your boyfriend or girlfriend, or you get busy with school, or you get busy with your kids, and you forget what God is doing in your life, and the weeds grow up. And then sometimes I can just be open and say, God, whatever you want. I'm totally open to you. Whatever you want in my life, I want to do it your way. Because that'll, fewer mistakes, shows I'm in the family, and leads me on to success. Now, how do you bear fruit? God wants you to bear fruit. That's what Decade of Destiny is all about. Bearing fruit is another term. It's a Bible term for being successful. God wants you to be fruitful in your business, in your family, in your friendships, in your relationships to God and to others, in your health and all. We're looking at these 7 areas of fruitfulness: physical health, relational health, financial health, spiritual health, emotional health, mental health, vocational health, your job. And we're going to take one of these at a time over the next 3 years. Right now we're working on the physical to get your energy level up so you have the energy to change in all the other areas. Now, God expects you to bear fruit. He wants you to be successful in these areas. How do you bear fruit when God tells you something? Here's the key. You tell somebody else. You pass it on. The way, when God tells you something, the quickest way to get it in your life is tell somebody else something you just learned. If you get an idea, you get an inspiration, you get a truth from your quiet time in a small group, tell somebody else. In a Bible study, the person who always grows the most is the one who's the teacher. Because by passing it on, you grow even more. Look at this next verse. They listen to God's word and cling to them and steadily spread them to others who also soon believe. Circle, spread them to others. Spread them. God wants you to pass on to others what you learn. Now we're moving into springtime. It's about 6 weeks till Easter. During springtime, people are more open to coming to church than any other time. Football's over and people are more open to coming. I hope you're planning right now who you're going to bring during the next few weeks and bring on Easter. Don't come by yourself. Bring somebody on Easter. Do you remember last year those Chilean miners who got trapped in that hole, in that mine? Everybody remember that story? There was a part of the story that never got told. During that full month that those miners were in the bottom of that mine for a full month in the dark, there was one guy who was a Christian believer. And one at a time, people began to come to him and he began to share the good news. He began to pass it on to other people. And during that month, while they were in the ground, 22 of those miners gave their lives to Christ and were saved, became believers in Jesus Christ. And it is an amazing story. And that guy, I called him up, and he's coming to share his testimony on Easter Sunday. That Chilean miner. Yeah. Now, obviously he speaks Spanish. He's bringing an interpreter with him who is the chaplain to the president of Chile. And he's going to be the interpreter that day. If you know anybody who speaks Spanish, and by the way, I've got 1 million friends who do here in Orange County. Okay, of the 3 million, 1 million speak habla español. So you make sure they're at church Easter Sunday, because he's going to share his message in Spanish and it'll be interpreted for us. It's going to be an amazing story. Now, during the Daniel plan, I've been going to see Dr. Amen, and he said, why don't you let me do a brain scan on you? I said, good idea. So he did, Dr. Amen did a brain scan on my brain, and I'm happy to report I have one. Okay. Kay doubted it sometimes, but I do, if I only had a brain, you know. I do have a brain, and I got to thinking as he was doing this brain scan, what if we were to do a spiritual brain scan on your brain, and we were able to put it up on these screens or in any of our campuses on all of the screens, and it could show what kind of mind you have. Closed mind, resistant mind, hurried mind, preoccupied mind, Shallow mind? What would it show? What kind of soil would your mind reveal spiritually? Are you resistant? Have you been closed to God? Your wife's been a Christian for years, or your husband's been a Christian for years, and you just out of your own pride refuse to let that seed get planted. And it's hard, and it's trampled down, and it's closed-minded. You're not open-minded. You're not even open to the possibility of letting God plant the seed in your mind. Well, I want to tell you this. God loves you too much to let you stay that way, and so he's going to soften the soil. If you have a hard heart toward God, or a hard mind to God, he will soften the soil. And how does God turn hard soil into soft soil? I hate to tell you this, but he sends a storm. He sends rain. And the rain comes and it softens. I want you to have to be able to avoid that pain, because he loves you too much to let you go through life with a hard heart and a closed mind. He will send a storm at some point in your life to soften that so the seed can get in. I suggest you open your heart and mind to Christ today. How about a superficial mind? You say, oh, I love going to church, but I'm always in a hurry. And God's not the top priority in my mind. And, I love the Lord, but I'm living for other things. And I don't really know the Bible. I don't have a quiet time. I'm not in a small group. You don't have any roots. And when the heat's on, you're going to wilt. And when the tough times come, and they do come, you're going to wilt. How about a preoccupied mind? You're always thinking about everything else, and you're too busy for God, and so much noise is going on in your life. And the weeds are growing up, and they're choking your life out. And I don't know what the weeds are in your life. It could be a relationship. It's choking out your spiritual life. It could be money. It could be a dream or a goal. It's choking out your spiritual life. If you're tired of living like that, you want to open your life up. You want to hear God speak to you. Now's the time. Let's bow our heads. Would you pray this prayer? Dear God, I want to learn to hear your voice. I don't want to have a closed mind. I don't want to have a distracted mind. I don't want to have a narrow mind. I don't want to have a shallow mind. I want to be good soil. I want to cultivate an open mind. I want to listen to you. I want to be receptive. I want to get my ears on. I want to allocate time to listen to you every day, to just get alone with you for a little bit and be quiet and read your word and listen. Today, I recommit to having a daily time with you and being faithful in a small group. If you're not in a group, just commit to get in one. Help me to eliminate the distractions and all the weeds in my life that choke the life out. I want to cooperate with you. And before you even tell me what you want me to do, I'm saying yes in advance to you, Jesus. I open up my life completely to you. I want to follow your path. I want to make fewer mistakes. I want to be on the path for my life that you've planned for me. If you've never said yes to Jesus Christ, say, Jesus Christ, I ask you to come into my heart and life today. Make yourself real to me. I want to follow you and know you and trust you. In your name I pray. Amen.